analog Midas mixers in 2020. Where did they come from and who are they for? We'll take a look coming up next. This video is made possible by viewer support through Patreon and visiting the website at DcSoundOp.com. Links below to join the supporting crew in the credits of each video. This video is not a paid review, but it is important that you know where gear comes from when it is sent in by a company like this and not purchased independently. I really appreciate every manufacturer who has sent in gear and been up to the challenge of letting me cover it and talk about it without their input. I really do respect that and appreciate the genuine interest in honest feedback, so thanks to the companies who do participate. I should mention before I get into this, I have used these consoles before. The DM12 version from this series I've used quite a bit in years past. That one was purchased as a replacement for an aging, I think it was an Alesis rack mixer in a portable rack system that moved throughout a large art gallery for various performances and pop-up events. For them, it was a huge step up from what they had in that context and a good value for the budget they had to work with at the time. So keep that in mind as we move along. So this is a Midas console with 12 mono microphone inputs and 2 additional stereo channels. Outputs include typical left-right on independent faders, as well as 2 aux sends that can either be pre or post fade. Finally, you get the basic traditional analog control room headphone monitoring bus, as well as the typical 2-track record and input that can be routed to the mains or local monitors. Now, before anyone heads to the comments to ask about the mic pre's, how they sound, are they really Midas? Are they Midas? Are they genuine Midas? Are they powered by Midas? Just let's put the marketing materials down and talk about this whole thing for a second. The mic preamps themselves are what you're going to get out of almost every mixer in this price range. They offer 60 dB of gain at the mic input. They don't add any significant noise or color to the tone. Very, very little difference between something like this and something like an DM12 from Soundcraft. A remarkably unusually similar mixer from 2006, which sells for a little bit less than the DM16 does today. What you will notice right away about this console, though, is the lack of a pad or a high-pass filter at the input stage. Now, having mixed many shows on Midas consoles, including different Heritage series, as well as the Verona and Venice consoles at all different sized events, broadcasts, and concerts, not including a high-pass filter makes no sense at all to me coming from Midas. You end up using the low-shelf EQ here at 80 Hz, and that produces a less than ideal result if what you need is a high-pass filter. And for the people that are most likely to use a small-format analog mixer in the real world, somebody doing audio for a speech or a small gathering or a small ensemble, these are situations where high-pass filtering is critical. It's hard to understand what the thought process here was, leaving it out on a Midas console. Applying gain at the microphone input, the bottom of the control range starts at +10, here marked simply as 10 on the console, and extends up to +60. And this will have you using the 1/4-inch inputs or your own pads in line for anything hotter. It's not labeled, but the line level input gain ranges from -10 to +40. So getting back to the Midas versus powered by Midas preamp discussion, let's remember for a second that Midas sells their good mic preamps in the XL48 right now for around $1,000 street price. Now that's an 8-channel unit at around $125 per channel with no mixer attached. You do get a high-pass filter and some other features, but it should be pretty obvious to anybody that these are not the same Midas mic pre's as those, or the ones you'll find in older Midas desks whose dust covers used to cost more than this mixer. I've read reviews online from folks absolutely gushing over how good these sound when you push everything into the red, and it was pretty heavy on the hyperbole, and if that's your plan, we're going to be on kind of different pages for how we look at gear like this. To be really clear, I'm not knocking anybody's approach or this mixer. I've worked with far too many amazing artists who use gear successfully in ways that I might have said isn't technically correct. To be critical of that kind of stuff at all If you like to mix into the red and a Midas mixer makes you happy, then this may be the mixer for you. I just wish we could get beyond expecting the XL4 mic pre's to show up for free. It is worth mentioning that when you compare the specs of this DM series to the XL48 mic pre's, they're not close, making it difficult to assume they would share any tonal or harmonic similarities when saturated or overloaded, simply because of the brand name. I've linked below a really good Rain white paper on total harmonic distortion plus noise, and some of the ethics behind how lots of companies choose to report or obfuscate the methodologies used in getting the numbers they use on their spec sheets in the first place. Now, this is not unique to Midas or Music Tribe, and I mean that very, very seriously. Every brand does spec sheets differently, and it can be nearly impossible as a result to compare gear on paper or solely by what the marketing says. 20 years ago, brand reps were leaning into this already when I worked in retail, and always seemed to have a wisecrack or anecdote at hand when they'd come to visit about how the other guy was fudging the numbers. It's a pretty common thing, and we still see it today, and it'd be really nice if we had some sort of agreement or standardization on some of these methods, just for the end users to be able to look at numbers that actually are apples to apples, at least a little bit more than what you get nowadays. Some manufacturers do a lot better than others to explain how they arrived at their numbers, and others simply publish numbers and specs, and it's really on you to interpret them, if that's even possible given the limited data they often provide on how they got to those answers. Let's keep moving though down the line from input to output. I think lots of folks will be happy to see inserts on each of the mono channels. They are unbalanced as expected, obviously, but a very welcome addition to any small mixer like this. Inserts would be a very good reason to buy a mixer like this. If you're planning to process your signals externally with outboard gear, inserts offer huge potential for creative problem solving, and I think a lot of folks that I talk to anyway miss the convenience of having them on every channel when you get to digital consoles. EQ is limited on all small format consoles compared to what we're doing on digital these days, but this one is particularly limited. It's got a low shelf at 80 Hz, a high shelf at 12,000 Hz, with a semi-parametric covering from 150 Hz up to only 3.5 thousand. Now, that's a whole lot of ground to cover with a single filter, and it's got a fixed width. So the sharper folks there are going to notice that there's pretty big gaps there between 80 and 150 Hz where you tend to do a lot of EQ in the real world, as well as between 3.5 and 12,000. That's just a place where you're going to do a lot of corrections for sibilance, and there's not a whole lot you can do with this EQ to address that. The aux ends are next, and this is another one that caught me off guard coming from Midas, and that is the lack of any output level control on these aux ends. You get the choice to make each one either pre or post globally, but no level control for the overall output. Now on the Venice console, those are faders, but a knob would have been fine. For less experienced users, this kind of setup is not going to do you any favors in learning how to manage gain structure properly. And again, from somebody like Midas, I think that's a little bit of a shame. Panning is super straightforward since we've only got left-right, no other bus assignments, as is the pre-fade listen function, which allows you to solo channels to the headphone output as well as to the local monitor or control room output. Both of those have their own individual level controls, and that's super helpful for working on the desktop when you're going back and forth between the two. The mute switch is functional enough until you realize that there's no indicator light to let you know when anything's muted. Same with the PFL. You can PFL something and you get an indicator over here that the PFL is engaged, but without looking at the console, you won't know where. And that's something, once more, that the less experienced user is going to feel the most in the moment when they bring a fader up for something in a live event and nothing happens and there's no indicator light saying what's on or off. They're going to be the ones that struggle with that more than experienced users, and that's unfortunate. I think visual aids are really helpful, especially folks coming or that are used to digital mixers where it's an overload of visual aids. Having none at all can be a little bit startling in contrast. So honestly, this one is a bit of a tough sell. It's a purely analog console, stripped down to nearly the absolute minimum, and you need to love this Midas name to get excited about the markup. The problem there for me is that mixing on one in a professional setting did not remind me of any Midas desk that I've ever used. These short 60mm faders don't feel like Midas faders under the finger, and this EQ feels less like a Midas EQ from a Heritage series than the Venice did when it came out. What this desk has been excellent for here in my workshop, though, is actually just having some physical controls for various feeds coming into or out of my Dante test network. Some of the most common questions I see from new Dante users online is things like how to combine two signals down a single output or some stereo to mono. Now, obviously, you need either a hardware or software mixer to do that kind of thing, and the DM series here makes for a fine option for that. For a workshop or a creative space or any other small individual space where you need low latency, simple hands-on control for a number of signals, this works well. Insert points, they open up a ton of options for adding more interesting processing, and that's always helpful. And we've got to remember that the advantages of digital and networked audio can be overshadowed for some folks by the apparent complexity and just limitless possibilities of setting it all up. A nice simple analog setup with a mixer like this can still do a fantastic job locally in one room with an operator who wants to stay in the analog domain, while allowing them to connect up to a network using individual smaller devices and communicate with the outside world a few channels at a time. That's often all you need. That's usually enough to get online for anything streaming and pull in and send out the channels for basic events that most people are doing, and a lot of folks will just feel more comfortable sitting behind an analog mixer when they're trying to figure all that out at once. So that's it for the DM12. I hope you take what I'm saying in the spirit that it is intended. This mixer does serve a great function. Certain people are definitely going to like it, and that Midas name is going to be worth the money to them. It is a tough sell. It's definitely a niche product compared to what else you can get for the money, even from Midas and Behringer right now. And this one's going to fit a certain use case for certain people. And if you've always wanted to own a Midas mixer, this might be your chance. Thanks for watching. We'll be back real soon. Let me know down in the comments with any questions you have about the DM16 or anything else to do with this, and I'll be sure to get those over to the good folks at Midas so we can get some answers. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.